Well, hello there, everyone. How you doing today? This is Saturday, April the 22nd, year 2023. This is Mazske Finance. I do have a special guest with me, but before we turn it over to him, I'll give him a little disclaimer. And just so you know, neither one of us are financial advisors, CPAs, attorneys, and I doubt we'll talk about health much, but just in case we're not doctors or nutritionists, nothing like that. So anyway, I'd like to welcome aboard Cassidy. How you doing there, Cassidy?
Hey, Mazske, doing great. Glad to be here.
All right, sounds good to me. It's nice to meet you and put a, kind of put a face with a name now because we've emailed different times. But Cassidy, just so our listeners all know, you've told me a little bit about yourself, but if you want to, go ahead and tell us a little bit about yourself, what led you to getting the properties you currently have, and we'll kind of take it from there.
All right. Yeah, thank you. So I'm trying to figure out how far back I want to go, but I think I'll start with when I graduated college, it was right when the bottom of the market fell out near 2008. So it was kind of around 2010, 2011, 2012, right around there is I was trying to get into my industry and graduated from college and just wasn't working. Everybody who, first everybody got laid off, and then now they were rehiring all the folks who had 5+ years experience. And so I ended up coming back to the mountains where I currently am right now, in the mountain country, California, specifically Grass Valley, Nevada City area, if you're familiar at all. It's kind of between Sacramento and Truckee, is that area there. And I ended up getting kind of back into the family business a little bit, doing some construction. And then I got really sick and I ended up being like disabled for almost a year. And it went from having like these prospects to all of a sudden having a very tight budget and, having a wife and, and she's having to support both of us. So that's when I really started looking heavily into, man, okay, so this money stuff is really serious. You got to really pay attention to it. And I was lucky enough to land an office job in my area, and they had great insurance. So I was able to figure out what was wrong with me and was able to start saving up. And before long, because my wife and I are pretty frugal, we had a pretty good little nest egg going. We cleared all our debts. And so we started looking for a house. And in my area, it's still California, a single family home this close to Sacramento is not going to be very cheap. And so on our budget, we were looking around like, okay, I've got a construction background. I could maybe fix something up, we could go from there. And man, this is around 2015. There was nothing that was remotely acceptable as a project that I could have any way to get in and make it livable, even, without it just taking forever and draining all of our finances. And so after we found one where the realtor literally turned to me and said, Cassidy, I'm not going to sell you this place. This is a money pit. You will put money in here and you'll never get it back. I started changing the way I thought about things. Like, okay, so if I can't afford small, maybe I can afford bigger with help. Didn't know at the time that was called house hacking, but I ended up finding a duplex, and it was way more than I could afford. But I got in for like 3.5% down, because I'm a first-time home buyer, and I got renters in, and all of a sudden my cost of living went down extremely. It was like about $400 a month, and the renters were paying. You frozen right now? Okay, might have come back.
All right, you're back.
All right, great. Yeah. So yeah, the renters were paying the other half, and I was like, oh, this is a really great way to live. And still didn't really know what I was doing. Made some, first time mistakes about trying to give people chances who maybe not deserved them for tenants. Had to do a lot of fixing. Learned kind of the hard way about those sorts of things, and I eventually stumbled across bigger pockets, but it was a little too much going on there. It seemed like and was to go big or go home. And in this area, there just isn't really a way to go big. It's all really, Victorian houses and, these really, buildings that are from the 1930s. And there's no real big apartment complexes, maybe like one or two, but they're well established and they're not going anywhere. And so it wasn't until I stumbled across Michael Zuber's One Rental at a Time, where he actually could, laid out this story of, look, you can just get smart with your one area and find a deal that works in that one area, and then you're good. And then you do it again. And that was really refreshing. So I started following advice. I learned definitively that single family homes in my area do not work. They negative cash flow unless you're gonna completely almost tear them down and rebuild them back up, or build from scratch. And so I started looking in small family, multifamily, and I found one in 2021, and everything worked. And it was, of course, the height of the bidding wars in 2021. So I ran my numbers on the place. I had a great realtor. We put our offer in, and we were rejected. And it was like, all right. And so then it turns out the people they did go with, they wanted to move into that place. And in California, you have 60 days when you're moving in, that the tenant basically gets to try and find a new place. And because COVID was around, it was a little questionable as whether or not you could even do it. So they backed out. And then so they came back. It was like, hey, give us your best offer. Like, you've already got my best offer. So another round, and they didn't go with us again. And then it turned out the second person who accepted, so this was two cabins on one property, and the second person wanted to remodel the ADU, the smaller cabin, and the property is typical, I would say, for around all over the place. And the setbacks wouldn't work. You'd have to go through some bureaucracy to do a remodel back there. And so they pulled out. And my realtor was like, look, we're here. We're still here. We've got all of everything squared away. Go with us. And I think they finally went, okay, fine. And part of that was we agreed to also take their tenants because they were currently occupied. And so we got in. And we got the place, and it's been great. Had a little bit of snow damage this last year for what the locals here called snowpocalypse. But yeah, that's kind of my story up to now.
So, all right, sounds good. Well, I'm glad that you discovered what we call house hacking, because that really helped you out, it sounds like. And I know in California, I know it's expensive. I've been out there. So. And as you know, I invest primarily out in the Midwest, and you did tell me you might be interested in doing that yourself, right?
Yeah. So I'd say that before COVID, there was actually like an average of a positive yield you could get on a duplex around here. And then since then, the rents, I mean, it's a small area, it can't really keep up. Like, you can't really jack the rents as high is at somewhere down in Sacramento or something. Excuse me. Sorry. And but that hasn't stopped the property values from shooting up. So now, as I'm looking at it, not only is there hardly anything for sale, but the things that are for sale, they just don't cash flow. So since it's been that way for almost over a year now, I'm thinking about branching out of this area and I was looking at some places that are a little further away from me in California. There's a couple spots near Beale Air Force Base that I was looking at, but they're kind of far enough away that I'll have to use a property. And right now I'm self-managed. And my thought process was, well, if I'm going to be using a property manager, then I might as well find the best location to invest. One that's going to work better. So now I'm just looking around and actually trying to find a place out of state. And and you and Millennial Mike seem to have some great success with investing in your area. So I kind of wanted to learn more about it.
All right, that sounds good. Because I mean, if folks watch my channel, they probably heard my story. You know, I started off, I was living in Virginia. I bought my first 5 units in Virginia where I lived at. I was self-managing. But by self-managing, it did stress me out quite a bit. Had to remodel stuff, be like the primary contract. I didn't do the work, but I had to organize all my contractors. And then I started realizing this area, even though it's not expensive as compared, say, to California, it's still expensive. And there's got to be a better place I can buy real estate. And at that time, I had also found bigger pockets and started making some contacts. And I first bought in Birmingham, Alabama, because it's cheaper there. But I really didn't have very good success in Birmingham. And then I reached out to Michael Zuber because him and I had been on his channel back in, I think, in 2018. And I asked him, I told him, I said, Mike, I'm thinking about using a turnkey operator for the first time. And by this time I had like 6 or 7 units, but I said, I'm thinking about using a turnkey operator. And I threw a name out to him. And excuse me. And he was kind of like, well, I've never heard of that one, but I know of someone, another one I've met. I can introduce you to him if you want. And I said, sure. So he put me into contact with him. And that was a gentleman named Tom Olson, who's located up in Gary, Indiana. And I talked to Tom. I talked to Tom's, say, right-hand man, who is Jared. And I liked what they told me. And then I started digging around, learning about Gary. And when I first learned about Gary, it would pop up if you Googled it, and it'll still pop up. It would say like the most miserable city in the United States. It would tell about all the issues they've had there with the population pushing 200,000 people and then dropping from, say, the 1950s to present day down to just under 80,000 people. Okay, so that's a huge population drop.
Yeah.
But then from talking to Tom, Tom had told me, he said, Gary is in this position right now. This is going back to 2019, I guess it was, early 2019. And he said, Gary is starting to change. You know, he himself has flipped something like 2,000 houses that he's bought and renovated and flipped himself. And he said, you can still find great deals in Gary, but it's like a wide open window. You can find these really great deals, but that window is starting to close because good things are happening to Gary. And when I first talked to him, I asked him, what are those good things happening? And he said, there's rumor we might be getting like a Hard Rock casino coming into town. He did mention the Gary airport having a very long runway, longer than the airport in Chicago. He did bring up Amazon and UPS. I think by that time, Amazon and UPS had both built distribution centers in the Gary area. So I decided to give it a try, and I bought my first rental house in Gary through Tom Olson. Shortly after I bought it, I was in Gary. I got a tour. I saw the house I bought. I got a tour of the area. I really liked what I saw. And part of what I saw was it was like a war zone in spots. It was burnt out houses in spots. You might be on one block where you're standing in front of a freshly rehabbed house, and the one across the street is a shell of a house that was burnt down. One over there, 2 houses down, maybe it needs to be torn down because it's so rough. But I liked what I saw because it's like I was seeing what I called a very, very, very rough diamond that maybe if we get lucky, it'll start shining one day. So I end up buying another 4 or 5 rental houses from the Olson Group, turnkey properties. They were rehabbed when I bought them. I was paying at that time what was retail market value for those houses because of the turnkey. And this is in 2019 and going into 2020. My most expensive house then was $70,000. My cheapest was probably around $50,000 from a turnkey company. Okay. Then I started making more contacts there. I had 2 different property managers, and my one property manager, it's a husband-wife team. That's Kurt and Vicky. Kurt's been on my YouTube channel before. He's in, I do have a playlist, interview with others, and he did a walkthrough of a Burr property that I had bought. And he's the husband part of the husband-wife team of the property managers. So, but when I got to know them, I did a couple different things. I started buying houses off the MLS. I also had Kurt and Vicky told me about a package of properties one time where I ended up buying 2 of them, and a buddy of mine bought the other 2. And then I told them one day I was interested in seller financing, and they helped me to find somebody that owned at one point hundreds and hundreds of properties in the area. He was getting older, and he was willing to sell some of them and use seller financing. So,
Nice.
yeah, so as the next, say, 2 years went on, I ended up buying right around, I think altogether, like 20 properties in the Gary area. Okay, so I've learned a lot about the area. The Hard Rock Casino did get built. It is there, and I was just recently told that they are looking to buy more land around their property because they have the casino, and maybe they have a very small hotel. I can't remember, or no hotel, but they want to make their hotel part a lot bigger. Okay, so they're exploring buying more land to expand. But as they get bigger, Amazon is also getting bigger. The Gary Airport, they are adding another runway to get even bigger because as the Gary Airport gets larger, Amazon, UPS, they're operating their commercial aircraft on those at that airport because it's convenient to them. There's also trains that run through there. It's also, Gary is located. Gary's about 40 minutes or so from Chicago. Chicago is a big city. I have had tenants that used to live in Chicago, and the feedback that was given to me is that they would live in like a studio apartment in downtown Chicago and pay whatever they paid for rent. And then they found Gary and they realized they could rent a single family home with front yard and backyard for the same rent or cheaper rent than they were paying in Chicago. And
Wow.
they still work in Chicago, but they live in Gary and they just commuted. So it's pretty good. So, but with that being said, Millennial Mike and myself, we've had several interviews together, and we've talked, and we've said a couple things together. One, we don't tell anybody, yes, 100% buy in Gary, you know, because it's like anywhere. Say if I'm talking to you, I would say, Cassidy, do your own due diligence on Gary. Don't just talk to me. Talk to other investors. Dig around on the internet. You can always reach out to the Olson Group. I'll send you an email if you want, and I'll send Jared an email together where you can get on Jared's email list and you'll see what houses they have available now. But with that being said, the Olson Group, their housing prices are no longer in the $50,000 to $70,000 range. They've upped their game with doing better jobs on the rehabs, putting in better quality countertops, just doing a better job. But the prices I'm seeing are ranging from maybe roughly $95,000 to $125,000. All right, so that is the retail price. But they're usually, when they send an email out, they'll say it'll still meet the 1% rule. Okay, if you look at houses on the MLS, you will find properties. You can still find properties that are $25,000, but looking at the pictures and from what I know about them, it might be better to buy them and tear them down to build a new one, or maybe you'll get lucky and find one for $25,000 that you put 20 grand into it, and you got a nice house. You know, you just don't know. All right. The area there are investors moving into Gary. more houses are getting flipped and renovated. If the prices are going up, and I'll give you an example. I bought a
Yeah, just like
house.
everywhere.
Yeah, I bought a house from, one of the ones I bought seller financing. I bought it for $49,900. I put $11,500 into it to renovate it, and then I did a refinance on a cashback refinance. And when the appraisal was done, I was hoping it would appraise at 100 grand, 110, 120. And the appraisal, it was right at the peak of the prices. The appraisal came in at 160,000. And I was like, well, that's really
Wow.
cool. I bought it for say 50 grand, and now it's 160,000. So that's really cool.
Right.
So
That's really
anyway,
cool.
I've been talking here a lot, just based on what you've heard me say and what you know. What do you think about that? What do you think about the Gary area? Do you think it would work for you, or just?
It sounds like it's definitely worth looking at. It also sounds like there are, I want to say, maybe zip codes or parts of Gary, Indiana that are worth looking at, and other ones that are not quite ready or invest at own risk. And one of the things that I've heard said before is that you kind of, the best way, or maybe not the best way, but it's really a huge advantage when you're investing out of state, is to have some contact somewhere that you can actually trust to, or if you've like previously lived there and you kind of know the area just a little bit. And I'm wondering, how did you get around that? Because it sounds like you didn't really spend much time there, haven't very many contacts besides the Olson group.
Right. What I do nowadays, I lean primarily on my property managers, the husband and wife team.
Mhm.
And if I'm considering a property, and I've used two different real estate agents there who both are, knowledgeable about Gary. But if I ever buy a property off the MLS, I contact both my real estate agent and I contact my property managers and say, I tell the real estate agent, I ask him, can you line up, to see one of these properties? And then I'll ask Kurt or Vicky, can one of you go with them at the same time? And so I can get feedback from both the real estate agent and from my property managers. Because I always, no matter who the real estate agent is, I always keep in the back of my mind, they're making money off this deal. Okay, that's
Right.
why they're in the business. Property managers potentially will make money off the deal if it's a good deal for me, because if I buy it, they're now getting their property management fee and, et cetera, et cetera. The property manager, they have the contractors, and if it needs work, because almost every single house you buy there will need some work,
Mhm.
they'll then get one of their contractors to go by and give an estimate on, what all, how much the rehab will cost. At the same time, both of the PMs, they are knowledgeable about the cost. So they just, when they walk through, they can give a ballpark estimate of what a rehab will cost. Rehabs, just like everywhere else, when I first bought there, a rehab might be $10,000. Now the same rehab might be $20,000, $25,000, $30,000. Prices have gone up.
Yeah.
But when I first bought there, I was getting rents $700, $800 a month, maybe pushing $900. Now, a lot of my rents are at the low end, $900, $950, at the high end, $1,295.
Okay.
Okay, so they've
Pretty
gone
spread.
up. And say
Yeah.
on my roof, that one house I mentioned, the 49,900 one that appraised at 160. When I bought that, it was renting at around 750-ish. And after the rehab, it's now renting for 1,250. So it's a pretty good jump then, 700 to 1,250.
Yeah, it's a good jump.
Right. But even with that, if I look at the MLS, I know the layout of the city. I've been on Google Earth. I've been to Gary. A friend of mine has done like a map when he drove through, given his input on different blocks in the city. I might look at all
cool.
that, but even with that said, I'm not going to buy anything until one of my property managers in Gary drive there, tell me what the neighborhood looks like, tell me what the house, just what the house itself looks like, and then
Right.
get a good inspection of it, because I don't want to buy it and then turn out, unbeknownst to me, it needs a new roof, needs a new furnace, and the sewer line needs to be dug up and replaced, you know?
Right.
So,
So yeah, definitely getting someone who's a little more of a neutral party to take a look at it, or even potentially somebody who's going to benefit from the litter side, seems extremely important. So I'm also wondering about the tax structure there. I know that, like, you know, Texas, the tax gets reassessed nearly every year, whereas in California, it's kind of just based off of what it's sold for. What's the property taxes like in Gary?
okay, taxes there to me are lower than, say, where I'm at here in Florida. They're lower than they were in Virginia. But with assessments, there's a couple things that have happened. Recently, there was a referendum that passed that tax an additional fee onto taxes, onto your tax bill. Okay. Whenever I buy a property, normally an assessment is done within a year to 2 years, and I'll see a little jump, you know, the property value will jump and my taxes will jump. All of my properties with that referendum passing, the taxes have jumped because now there's an additional fee tacked onto each of my tax bills. Now with that, if you pull up, every jurisdiction, as you probably know, has a website where you can pull up a house and see what the taxes are on that house. Okay, so the city of Gary's in Lake County, Indiana. You can pull up their website. If you're looking at a house online, you can pull it up on that website and bring it up and see what the last year's taxes were, what this year's taxes are. And knowing that if you buy it, odds are in a year or two, just because you bought it, especially if you do work on it, and you're going to pay a higher price than they had initially assessed at, taxes, every rental property I've bought in 4 states, taxes have gone up after a year or two because the price I'm buying it at is higher than what they were assessing it at.
Right.
Okay. But still, with that being said, the little bit I know about California, taxes in Indiana are less than they are in California. They're less than they are here in Florida. They're less than they are in Virginia.
So how do you, I mean, with, you know, obviously with cheaper properties and lower rents, you're kind of working on I don't want to say slim margin, but a kind of a slim margin when you factor in the cost of the mortgage and property management and all that. So what percentage are you usually factoring in for tax changes when you're calculating your yield?
Well, I personally am not factoring that in. When I run my numbers, I look at what I have right now. You know, whatever the taxes are right now, whatever the mortgage rate is right now. And I want my yield, looking at the property values I'm buying at. The most expensive house I bought in Gary, I think, is $70,000. Okay. Even one I bought last year, I bought it for $45,000, you know, and then I had to rehab it. So when I look at if there's a tax increase, it's not an expensive house. It's not $200,000. It's under $100,000. So the taxes should be lower, you know.
Right. Okay.
But at the same time,
that makes sense, because I mean, I gotta, get out of the California way of thinking. Like the duplex I bought, I got it for $290K in 2015, and then I refinanced when it was very smart to refinance when the rates were super low, and it was appraised for over 400. So we're not looking at those sorts of bumps. we're looking at like a couple or tens of grands instead of hundreds of thousands, which is going to have a much smaller bump in taxes. Yeah. Okay.
Right. That's correct. And when I run my numbers, and I'm also, I'm factoring up or calculating what is my positive cash flow each month, what's my yield in a percentage. I'm always looking at yields. My goal is to not have any yields below 12%. And my yields have ranged from 12% to about 30% at initial buy. Okay. Now, due to some rehabs and rent increases, I have some properties that are yielding me, based on the money I put into the property, I'm getting a 40% or better return on some of those properties. And you figure I only bought them in the past 2 or 3 years or 4 years, maybe. So, but my property managers, I lean on them a lot because they're pretty good at telling me, what the estimate would be to rehab a house. If it's already rented, they're good at telling me, they might tell me something like, it's renting at $750 a month. But if you clean it up some, as you get a new tenant in there down the road, rents are expected to increase maybe to 1,000 or 1,100 or 1,200. Okay, because a house in Gary right now, if it's been rehabbed, it's rare to find a single family home that would rent for under $1,000.
Oh, okay. Wow. Okay.
I do have some properties that are under $1,000. I have tenants in there. They've been there for 20 years. One in particular I'm thinking of, they're an elderly couple. They've been there 20 years. So every year we give them like a $25 or $50 rent increase, but they're about $300 under market value, but I'm not going to jack it up and just push them out the door,
Yeah. I've got a renter right now, and they're on fixed income, super nice. They take care of the property really well. And, I don't want to increase rent on them I recently just had insurance rates go up. And so I'm looking at maybe having to, but if I do, then it's going to be a conversation with them and less of a, hey guys, here's the hard and fast of it. Because it's nice having that ability, especially when it's, you're not in the negative or close to it yet.
Right, true. I have a property like that in Virginia. I still self-manage a house in Virginia because I'm down in Florida. Because I know the tenant. I like the tenant because she is very severely disabled. She can barely walk. She has a variety of health problems, but she still works a full-time job. And I respect her for that. And when she's been living there about 4 years, and I know how much she makes, I'm not going to jack the rent up because rents there, just like everywhere, have gone up quite a bit. And I'm debating right now, in 2 months, I need to do a lease renewal. And I'm debating how much I want to raise it because my taxes have gone up, my insurance has gone up, and I need to raise it to cover expenses. And it's gotten to where that house is my lowest cash flowing property that I have. It's positively cash flowing, but it's low. So I am going to increase the rent, but I'm not going to jack it up to market rent because that would probably be like a $400 increase. I'm not going to do that to her. So,
have you thought about using Dion's binder strategy?
Yes, I have, because that's what I plan to do. And I'll do it over the telephone because I don't plan to be in that area anytime soon. And she knows that, we've talked before about it. She knows that. So I may do something like that and basically show her my expenses, show her the market rent around her, and kind of let her give me feedback on what she would like to pay. Yeah.
No, it's exactly what I did with my tenants that I was just talking about when I came in and bought the place, and it was very under rented, and just asked them did exactly what Dion said, and they asked for a rent increase, so it works.
Right. And the one cool thing with her, and I won't keep talking on this tenant, but the one cool thing with her, I do give her a 2-year lease, and that's the only person I would give a 2-year lease to, because I know her well enough to do that. And I tell her, she was worried about I would jack the rent up after a year. And I said, tell you what, I'll lock the rent in for 2 years. You know, you go 2 years. But every month she pays me extra. And I asked her about that, and she's like, well, I'm just giving you a tip. You know, I'm giving you a little extra each month. Because she knows it's under market value. So if she has extra money, she's, you know, tacking a little bit more onto the rent check. That's kind of nice.
That's very nice. Very sweet.
So, but anyway, but I'd encourage you, you know, like, dig around, do your due diligence on Gary. I can, if you're interested, I'll put you in contact with the property managers. I'll put you in contact with the turnkey operator. And I can provide some more information to you.
Yeah, I'd appreciate that. A question for you though.
Sure.
Yeah, so I want to say, if I'm doing my due diligence, for example, in my area, there's not a lot of like, I want to say reputations that are like Gary's, you know. For when you're doing the due diligence on an area like Gary, is there special things I should be considering? Something maybe safer area?
I would say dig into the best you can. Look at who the employers are in Gary.
Employers, okay.
Right, they do have a what is it? U.S. Steel is still there. They're a lot smaller than they used to be, but they're still there. You do have Hard Rock there. You do have Amazon, UPS there. You got the airport there. And like any area, you got schools, you got hospitals, you got the local government, police departments, fire department, et cetera, et cetera. So just kind of dig around. And I've told the only people I would say, hey, buy in Gary, is I have 2 sons, and I've told them, hey, you guys need to buy in Gary like I do. And Millennial Mike will tell you I bugged him about investing in Gary, but I don't think I ever said directly, Mike, you 100% need to buy in Gary. Do your own research, and I'll help you out. So, because it's your money, it's not my money. If you buy there, it doesn't benefit me. It's your money. And the last thing I want to do is you jump right into it and you buy a bad house or something, or you start losing money.
Yeah, no, it's definitely one of the things I've learned is it's easy to go broke going cheap. You got to do the research right.
Right. And another thing, just keep in mind, you also have Section 8 tenants.
Oh, what was that?
You also have potentially Section 8 tenants, like HUD tenants, voucher tenants, Section 8.
Oh.
Okay. And then I have a mixture of, I have primarily folks that are paying me on their own. You know, they work jobs and they pay the rent. And I have only like 3 or 4 out of all my properties there that are Section 8 tenants. Section 8 is guaranteed income. But from what I've seen in Gary, I think it's starting to change. But Section 8 a lot of times is a little below market value in Gary.
Mm-hmm.
But if you don't use Section 8, you rent to someone else, you don't know, are they going to stop paying rent in 2 or 3 months? You know, you just don't know.
Right.
And that's
I've tried using Section 8 up here. And in my area, it's called the Regional Housing Authority. And it actually, I guess in other places, Section 8 is usually based upon the city. And this one is kind of based upon several cities. It's like a central little location thing, and it covers this wide area, this wide rural area. And it's actually, when I got all my places actually ready for Section 8, because I'm very interested in the program, but there was nobody who qualified to get in Section 8. Like it seemed like the ability to actually for the regional housing authority to even have those vouchers available was extremely low. So I'm wondering, is there do you know if there's any difference in Gary, if it's easier to get for potential applicants to get onto Section 8 so that you can get them into houses, or is it all potentially as restrictive?
From what I've seen, when tenants apply, because when my property managers advertise a property, they will put, Section 8 is encouraged to, however they word it, Section 8 can apply as well. And if they get a Section 8 tenant, they screen the tenant because the tenant still has to meet their criteria. And with all of my properties, I don't know what the breakdown is percentage wise, but it seems like if 10 people are interested in the house, 8 of them are disqualified. The property manager says, no, they don't make enough money, their credit score is too low, they have prior eviction, or whatever it may be. So even though some tenants already have vouchers, my property manager might disqualify them because they just don't meet their standards.
Makes sense.
But they've
Sounds
never,
like great property managers.
Right, and they've never not been able to find a tenant for my properties. And out of all my properties there, I finally had to evict somebody just in the past 6 months or so. Okay, that's percentage wise for 20 properties. I evict one. That it's not that bad.
How'd the eviction process go?
Pretty good. It's cheaper than other places. It's quicker than other places. It cost me. My property manager charges a little fee, and the lawyer charges a fee. The legal fee was like $550. The property manager might have charged, I forget, $75 or $125. It was cheap. So it was under $1,000 of expenses. And that eviction was less than 2 months, maybe 6 weeks or something. It was quick.
Yeah, that's not bad.
So
things can get pretty ugly in California when you're trying to evict folks. Luckily, I haven't had to do so. I did have to do cash for keys once, but yeah.
Right. Oh, good. All right. Well, let me see here. Yeah, we should probably wrap this up then. But before we sign off, do you have any other last minute questions or anything?
No, I think you've given me a lot to get started with. I'd really appreciate if you forward me the contacts for the people you were mentioning. And sounds like I'm going to start looking into Gary.
All right, sounds good. So I'll wrap this up in just a minute then. And then once I do, as long as I don't disconnect this, I'll stop recording and we can chat just a little bit. So thanks for appearing on my channel, and I do appreciate it.
Thanks for having me. Really appreciate being here.
All right, sounds good. All right, everyone. Well, thanks for watching. Hopefully you learned a little bit about Cassidy and you learned a little bit more from me. So with that being said, we appreciate you watching, and Mazske Finance and Cassidy will be signing out.